Look at what's coming off. It's just like powder. It's not chips, really. And it also leaves a texture. Some people like that texture for certain areas. When you do a project in stone, I think it's comparable to taking a trip. The piece of stone that you're starting out with is like your home. And what you want to develop, what you want to carve into, it could be a head or whatever it is, that's your final destination. And these tools are your vehicles that are going to take you from the home to the destination. The punch or the point is like an airplane. The claw or tooth chisel is like the bus, and the flat chisel is walking. The punch is like the plane because it's the least precise. You know, you have to stop a safe distance away from your final destination and switch to a slower vehicle. And then this is more precise than the punch, but it's also slower. So you want to get off of that when you're, almost at the hotel. And then this one is the final one, which is actually you're walking, which is going to take you right to the couch, right where you can relax. So this is the final step, would be the flat chisel. So a lot of times beginners will be tempted to do more work with the flat chisel, the bladed tool, or the claw, because you can feel like they're biting in and you can feel like you're controlling them a little better with less practice. But the danger of that is the same as the danger of planning to go to Los Angeles and decide, I don't like the plane, I want to walk. You're going to get tired of walking long before you get out of New Jersey. You're going to get tired of carving, and the beautiful head that you had planned to make is going to look like a SpongeBob head with like features on the surface. And you'll see that. You'll see beginner work that's like, you still feel the block that they started with, and they just kind of put some details on the surface and a lot of rubbing and polishing, because beginners love that too. So if you ever have a chance to do this, really try to apply yourself and work hard at feeling effectiveness from the punch. It's the tool that does 99%, well, probably 90% of the waste is taken off with the punch. And this little sculpture here is meant to demonstrate that. It shows 3 stages in the development of this flower. Now the 0 stage, the very beginning stage, isn't here. It would just be like a flat, it would be like flat, like a plain block. This can be the 0 stage. But anyway, from 0 to 1, that's probably about 80% of the waste that's taken away in the whole project. And that's all done with the punch. From here to here, mainly it's just some refinement, just surface refinement. You've created a secondary level here for the diagonal leaves, but that's not that big a deal in terms of getting rid of waste. This is 90% of the waste has been taken away in this first step. That's important. It's a good idea to visualize your finished design in your mind as if it were a landscape, and then visualize it like as if it had snowed and everything was covered with a layer to sort of obliterate the tiny details and the little bitty edges. You guys are sculptors, so you probably don't have this problem, but a lot of people who aren't sculptors, they're so used to seeing everything in a drawing or a picture or photograph, two-dimensional. So they focus first on the outlines of things. They focus first on the details, the things that would create dark lines that you could draw on a page. But as a sculptor, that's like the last thing you want to really be concerned with. You want to be concerned with the big volumes and the big differences of high point and low points. Now the next tool in terms of big shaping is the pitch. It doesn't have like a sharp edge like a chisel, regular chisel does. It's got like a surface rather than an edge. This is the cutting edge. And I'm going to draw it. You can pass this around. you'll notice it's not perfectly symmetrical. Cutting part is on the center, and then there's that there's that flat part here. Now if it had a sharp edge, like most chisels do, like that, it's a tool that you whack it real hard, and if it had a sharp edge like that, it would be vulnerable and it would break, and it'd constantly be needing to be repaired. But it's got this, it's very like robust and capable of withstanding a big whack. But you want to use the edge that's in the center of the tool rather than this edge. You see the difference? You can get big pieces off with the pitch. If you can arrange it like this and hit it with this, you know, you can get much bigger pieces. It's a very powerful tool. But the disadvantage with that, or the limitation, if you have kind of a boulder, you know, like a rounded piece, then there's not that much of a place to set it up, you know? There's not that, it's got to have like a, it's got to be able to drive its shock in from like 90 degrees. If it's a round, like rough block, it's not so easy to find a place to put it that's not just going to put the shock right into the center. Because if you put big shock into the center of a block, say you do something like this, probably it's not going to break the way you want it to. It's probably nothing's going to happen. And it's going to put shock into the piece so that later on when you're doing something maybe right at the end, you know, you're liable to find that you've shocked it and put some kind of weakness into the stone that's going to make it something bad happen at the, you know, later on. You see this texture on the unfinished Michelangelo sculptures a lot, and other. This is an ancient tool, and this flat chisel comes also in rounded ends, because if you're doing a concave area, you know, the corners are going to be a problem. They'll always be digging in and leaving ugly marks. And this will give you that beautiful texture that I love so much. Now there's abrasives which you can use and have a great effect on marble and alabaster and some of those more translucent stones. You don't really polish limestone. It's nice to leave the texture of the tools. And I feel like polishing is this whole thing that beginners can get into and just sort of fall back. You know, it's like a crutch that can sort of make a boring piece look nicer, because marble's just beautiful when it's polished that way, even if the shape is not so interesting. I think it's kind of adding something which slows down your developing your carving skills. For a beginner, I really think limestone is a great choice, because part of the problem for a beginner is it's slow and it's hard, and it takes a long time to see your project through. So naturally, the softer a stone is, the more it's easier to get the feel of it. It's cheap, so as with anything, when you're first learning, it's good to have the stakes be low, because if you feel like you've spoiled something that you paid for, you know, really high price, it inhibits you from diving in and really breaking, you know, in a dramatic way. To saw through this much, you need a blade like this, you know, a round blade, because only half that is really, and less than half of that is actually getting into the stone. So just by simple tools, I've done something which would take a huge, expensive machine. Now, the most rough shaping, without getting gigantic machines that saw with like saw machines, is called feather and wedges. And these can be used to split a block. Basically, there are two strips of steel like this, and they go together so the little ears are pointing apart. And the wedge is driven down between them, spreads them apart, and obviously you got to turn it the right way and all the same way, so that gradually as you tap them one after the other. I drilled it beforehand. That's not so interesting to watch, and it's loud, and it take about 5 minutes to drill each hole. You didn't miss much. Now it's important, like I said before, not to put it like this, because then you put the stress this way. You want to put them all in the direction that you want the split to go. You can listen and hear the stress building up. Big disadvantage of the feather and wedges is it only really works on a straight line. Let's say you want to do a bust, and you're starting with a block like this. Well, let's make the shoulders a little bigger. You can't get this out. You can't get that out with the feather and wedges. It's just going to go, it's just going to break. It breaks straight. You'd have to somehow cut this, separate this, maybe with a saw like that, or some other means, or just go for something like that. Just take the corner off with the feathers and wedges, because it can only go all the way through. The saw, and I'm not going to show you too much because it makes a cloud of dust, but you'll get the idea and you'll see the potential of it. It's a tool for separating like that, but as you can imagine, this can only go this far into the, around the edges, so you couldn't actually cut through that block with the saw. You'd need a much bigger one. But if you have a lot of waste to get rid of, you could saw, you could saw cuts like this far apart, and then you'd get down, you'd get down about that deep just by snapping off the pieces in between. So people like it for that, and I'll show you that in a minute. That's all I'll show you, because it would fill this room with unpleasant conditions. But you can imagine just cutting through, and then just with the pitch, snapping off those bits, so that rather than breaking off, so you'd be breaking off chunks like this rather than like that size with the punch. And of course, what I was saying before, people use this even for shaping, sort of. They'll use the surface like this. Once you have these skills and you have an idea in your head what you want to create, how do you strategize where to take away? Let's assume it's a chunk of clay. It could even be clay. Now we've moved past it being stone, a chunk of material. How do you strategize the subtractive sort of approach to getting out what you want? And there are two extremes of approach to that problem. There's direct carving on one extreme, which is going into the stone with a sketch. Certainly you have a clear idea, a sketch on paper, maybe even a maquette of a different size. That's one extreme. And the other extreme is having a fully detailed and finished plaster model, which you're strictly copying, and you don't make any judgments at all when you're carving the stone. You're strictly following something which is communicated to you by a model.